This morning, the daughter of Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado is accepting the Nobel Peace Prize on her mother's behalf at a ceremony in the Norwegian capital of Oslo. The Nobel Institute said Machado would not be attending the ceremony, but that she would come to Oslo later. NBC News international correspondent Molly Hunter joins us now with more on this. Hey there, Molly. Let's start with the ceremony itself. Walk us through what's happening and what we've heard so far.
Yeah, Emily, it's still ongoing. It's just 26 minutes in. It started at the top of the hour. And this is always a really hopeful, really beautiful ceremony every single year. Now, the Nobel chair is still in his introduction. You see him on screen right there talking about democracy. And he opened about horrific stories, horrific testimonies of children under the Maduro regime. He specifically called his attention to children who were abducted following Maduro's election. And he detailed the torture that they survived. Now, he also said that authoritarianism is on the rise, Emily, and he had a really full-throated, kind of full-throttle, excuse me, if we're trying to listen to him, let's take a listen to what he's saying right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, as citizens of a democracy, we have a duty to be critical of information sources. Alarm bells should ring when the views we express are identical to those disseminated by one of the world's most manipulative disinformation systems. For in that case, we are not just spreading information, we are spreading the strategic propaganda of a dictator. What are we all to think when we read that it's the Venezuelan opposition that is threatening the country with war? That the democratic movement desire an invasion, when the narrative is turned upside down and when the victims are branded as aggressors. This is a version of reality that the Maduro regime tells the world, that it is the guarantor of peace. But peace based on fear.
And you hear the chair, Emily, talking right there. He gave a really full-throated, full-throttle defense of democracy. I'm not sure how much you heard of me talking right before he took over, before we played this soundbite. The ceremony is going on live, but he opened with testimonies about Venezuelan political prisoners. He talked specifically about children who had been abducted during the Maduro regime, really walked through kind of some horrific testimonies. And then he also had a really kind of big welcome to some key Venezuelans who are actually present. As you mentioned, the winner is not actually present at the ceremony, but one of the main guest there is Edmundo Gonzalez, who is the president-elect in that last election that, of course, Nicolas Maduro and his regime took over and, according to international election monitors, stole from him.
Molly, to your point about her whereabouts right now, the director of the Institute had earlier said that Machado's whereabouts were unknown, though now they say she's safe. So do we know why she wasn't officially able to attend the ceremony in Norway?
We don't know where she is right now. So you just heard from the chair just about 15 minutes ago that she will be in Oslo. She is not currently at the ceremony, but we don't know exactly where. We also don't know necessarily exactly what the timing is and if she's able to kind of arrive in Oslo later today. We do know, though, she released an audio recording, a phone conversation between her and the Nobel chair, Emily, earlier today, where she explained that so many people risked their lives to get her out of Venezuela, to make it possible for her to travel. And she said it's been a really hard journey, but she will be in Oslo. So as of right now, we know that her daughter, Anna Corina, is there. She will be accepting the award officially on her behalf. We do not know, though, where she is at this very moment.
And you see on your screen some of her supporters. Last night, though, we also saw protests in Oslo against Machado's win. So what's driving some of the tension? Does this have to do with her support of the Trump administration's military actions in Venezuela and the Caribbean?
There is a lot of controversy surrounding her win, and there was a lot of controversy when the win was actually announced back in October. But the chair of the committee actually has kind of reserved a lot of his intro. It's now 30 minutes in this morning, talking about how you cannot judge democratic activists who are in an authoritarian regime, who operate under a dictatorship, because they are not dealing in ideal environments. They are not going to be necessarily making the choices or have the choices that you would like them to make. Some of the controversy controversy and some of the criticism of her win, Emily, as you say, absolutely deals with her support of President Trump's military action against Venezuela boats, the military buildup in the Caribbean, but as well as her support for Netanyahu, Israeli prime minister, and his military action in Gaza. The crux of the controversy has really been spearheaded and summed up by the Norwegian Peace Council. It's a group of 17 organizations. And they put out a statement. They said her views do not align with the core values of the council, despite her relentless work as an opposition leader. I think it's really complicated, and I think this is what the chair is addressing right now, to try to get people to understand just how hard it is, of course, to be an opposition leader, to be an activist for democracy. And he really kind of carries the argument fully through and says that in the end, though, a democracy and a democratic country does lead to peace, and that is in line with the Nobel's core values.
Okay, Molly Hunter covering all sides of this for us. Thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.